Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Wondergoal Live presented by Bet365. This is your Women's World Cup betting preview, groups A through H. I'll be joined in a second by my co-host and friend, Anthony DeBundo. But first, before we get into everything, this edition of Wondergoal Live is presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. Sign up with promo code ACTION to get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer. Bet $1 on any game and get $200 in bonus bets. Must be 21 years or older. Offer is available in Colorado, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, and Iowa. If you have a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, we are back from our month-and-a-half-long break because the Women's World Cup is kicking off on July 20th in Australia and New Zealand. It's an expanded World Cup field for the first time. We'll see 32 teams and 8 groups here at the World Cup. Before we get started, let's take a quick run through the odds on who is going to win the World Cup. And as always, these odds are presented by our good sponsors at Bet365. The United States, the two-time defending World Cup champions, are your favorites at 13-5. England sitting at 9-2. Spain also at 9-2. Germany 8-1. France sitting at 12-1. Australia 10-1. Netherlands 20-1. Sweden 20-1 as well. Japan 25-1. Brazil 33-1. Canada 33-1. Norway 50-1. Denmark 66-1. Italy is 100-1. Portugal is also 100-1. Colombia, 200-1. New Zealand, one of the hosts, sitting at 250-1. Switzerland as well at 250-1. China, Argentina, South Korea, Ireland, also at 250-1. Nigeria, 400-1. Zambia, 500-1. Jamaica, 500-1. Haiti, 500-1. South Africa, 750-1. Costa Rica and Morocco are both 1,000-1. Vietnam, 1,500-1. Panama, 2,000-1. And the longest shot in the field, the Philippines, sitting at 4,000-1. But we're going to kick things off here. This is your group-by-group preview. We're going to start here with Group A. Norway is the favorites here in Group A, sitting at -300. Switzerland and New Zealand are a close second here to win this group, both sitting at 5-1, and then Philippines, a very long shot at 500-1. Anthony, I just spoke for a really long time there. How are you attacking this first group, Group A?
Yeah, so kind of one of the bigger differences between like a men's World Cup and a women's World Cup is that as the women's game continues to kind of grow and expand across the world, there still is a little bit of a lag in the competitiveness in some of these groups. So you will see with 8 new debutants making their World Cup debuts, you're going to see some more blowouts, and you're going to see a lot longer odds, especially on these pot 4, fourth place teams that come into these groups projected as such. And you're going to see just general much bigger favorites to win a lot of these groups. And then we start in Group A, which I think is arguably the weakest of the 8 groups, with New Zealand being the host, getting automatically placed in Group A. There isn't like a pot 1 top tier contender in this group, which I think ultimately opens the door for a Norway as the clear favorite. I don't really see them having a ton of issues. They come into this World Cup with relatively inconsistent form. They've been up and down. They got pasted at the Euros by England last year, lost by 8 goals. So I think that kind of gets to the point where like this isn't really a team that I can see making a deep run and going toe-to-toe with what I see as the 5 favorites to win this entire tournament. But I do think that they are clearly better than New Zealand in this cycle. And if you look at New Zealand, I think it's a real question mark as to whether they would have even qualified if they weren't the hosts. They've been to the World Cup a bunch in their history. They've never won. They've played 15 games here, 5 different appearances, 3 games each time. And like I said, they've never won a match. They are the only, they are the longest team, or they played the most games without having won a game in the World Cup. And their form has really gone downhill in this cycle as well. 2 losses to the United States by 4 and 5 goals. They lost by 5 to Portugal, swept by Argentina in a home and home, lost to Nigeria, lost to Italy. The only win they've had really in the last calendar year was a 2-0 win against Vietnam, which considering Vietnam's current place in their footballing history, it's not really that impressive of a victory. So when you compare them to Switzerland, I think Switzerland's the clearly better team on paper. They've also kind of been inconsistent in general, but they've had a few results you can kind of hang your hat on and say, okay, that's a team that I can trust in this tournament. They have a new manager. And so Switzerland just has a general higher base of talent to the point where, even with home field advantage, which certainly matters for the New Zealand side here, the fact that the Swiss were able to kind of get some decent results last year gives me some cautious optimism that they're going to be the second best team here. So you can actually bet New Zealand minus 120 to not advance. And that's my favorite bet in Group A with all of the uncertainty surrounding them and the poor form.
Yeah, that's going to be my best bet too. I love the New Zealand not to advance at minus 120 because here's the problem. And you mentioned it with New Zealand, all of those friendlies that they had leading up here. If you exclude the one against Vietnam, they've been outscored 22-1. Like they have been not competitive whatsoever. And so they're getting a little bit of bump because they have home field advantage and their style of play really doesn't lend it a good hand to themselves given how Norway is going to set up and how Switzerland's going to set up because New Zealand wants to play out of a 4-4-2, but they also want to come out and press and they want to try to, disrupt, build up play and make life hell for their opponents. But it hasn't been successful. And once they fall behind, that's when you see the goals start to pile on when you face good build-up teams. Norway is a very, very interesting team in that their path to get through here. I mean, we'll get to that when we get to our best bets, but it's not as difficult as some of the other teams. And, they're sitting at a longer price. They have one of the best strikers in the women's game in Ada Hegerberg, who, won the Ballon d'Or in 2018. She was injured for most of the season for Leon, who's one of the best teams in the women's game. But if you look at the 2 seasons prior, like she's been a 0.9 XG per minute striker. Like she's really, really good. And Norway plays uber aggressive vertical football, trying to get forward, trying to put pressure on the back line. So that's why you see them losing, 8-0 to England and having all these high scoring event type matches. But they are clearly the best team in this group. So it really comes down to is like who's better, like you mentioned, who's better between Switzerland and New Zealand, because the Philippines, as we mentioned, is the longest shot in this tournament and really doesn't have any talent to compete with any of these teams. I mean, there are 2-goal underdog to Switzerland in the first game. Switzerland is a very, very slow build-up style team that likes to use a lot of short combination passes and really just, drain the life out of you. They're not very good when they get into the final third. But if you look through their roster, they have a lot of talent that's playing in the Women's Super League, whether it be the Bundesliga, a lot of the top leagues around the world. And you compare that to New Zealand and, the disparity of talent is pretty drastic between the two. So it's really going to come down to that game of who wins versus Switzerland and New Zealand. And given how short this price is, the Swiss, given the talent that they have, I agree with you that New Zealand, they have not been competitive whatsoever in the lead up to this. And basically, we're getting close to a pick 'em on whether they would advance or not against a team that actually does have talent. I agree with you. New Zealand not to advance at minus 120 is going to be my best bet.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing, like if it comes down to a tiebreaker, which is certainly possible. I mean, if both of these teams lose to Norway and New Zealand plays Switzerland and they end up playing to a draw, which is certainly possible, it may well come down to who can run up the score more on the Philippines. And the entire New Zealand attack is basically just Hannah Wilkinson from Melbourne City. They don't have much depth around her, and they haven't done a very good job. And obviously, they've only scored 1 goal in doing a very good job of kind of providing service for her. So I think as a one-man attacking group, Switzerland has more depth, and it is interesting how kind of women's teams and men's teams kind of have synergy in how they play within the country. Like you'll see this with Spain, you'll see this with Germany, and you certainly see this with the Swiss with their slow build-up, very pragmatic approach, and how that can kind of inhibit their ability to create in the final third. But again, the overall level of talent, I think, is just a tier higher than New Zealand here, the Ferns.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So New Zealand not to advance is going to be our best bet. Look at that. We already have a consensus here in Group A. Let's move on to Group B. One of the other hosts, Australia, is the favorite to win this group. They're sitting at minus 200. Canada, the 2021 Olympic champions, they are 2-1 to win this group. Ireland, making their World Cup debut, is sitting at 16-1. And Nigeria is the biggest long shot in this group at 33-1. A very, very interesting group, Anthony. Obviously, Australia is one of the hosts, so they're going to play all of their matches at home. And they do have a lot of talent. But I think you're going to agree with me here that this price is maybe just a tad too high on them to win this group.
Well, we're already in Group B. It's time to put my tinfoil hat on. The way that this group sets up, the most likely scenario is that Australia and Canada will be the 2 best teams. They're the 2 best teams on paper. and they play the other two teams in their group first. So one will play Nigeria, one will play Ireland, then they'll flop. So the odds are that both of these teams will have 6 points heading into the final group game against one another. It's kind of similar to what happened with England and Belgium 2 World Cups ago. And the way that this bracket sets up, it actually could be more beneficial to lose that game and be the second team, just based on how kind of the bracket could work out. So I will be interested to see if they go for that approach and kind of how that game gets played out. Based on, we'll know more as we get closer to the group, but ultimately I don't see a huge gap between these two teams. I think that they're roughly in that kind of 6 to 10 competitors tier. Australia has what I think is the best player in this tournament, and Sam Kerr, the Chelsea striker, who has been dominant in the Women's Super League and carrying that into the Champions League as well. She's been incredible for them. But I think overall, when you look at Canada's resume, I mean, having won gold at the Olympics, took the U.S. in the CONCACAF final last year. It was a 1-0 game that was very even, that they easily could have won if some chances and some big moments had kind of gone their way a little bit, but on the basis of the 90 minutes was a very even contest. I don't think there's a huge gap here. Now you can look at Australia's results too. They have some really encouraging performances and results in the last year. They just ended England's unbeaten streak. England had not lost in 30 matches. They finally did. They lost at the hands of the Aussies. But overall, given the parity in this group between the top two teams, I think that just getting the 2-1 price on Canada is a little bit of value here, given that I think that they're going to end up playing each other on the final day and both be sitting on 6. And it will be interesting to see how the game theory works into that. Could there be some rotation? Could the Aussies sit, Kerr to get ready for the knockout stage, depending on where they end up in their group permutation. So we won't know that now, but heading into the tournament at 2-1 with Canada, I think that's where I'm going to end up here in that one.
Yeah, I agree. I think the price is just a little too high, and I think you're just getting a little bit of a home field advantage bump here for Australia. And, the thing is that Canada and Australia have played each other. They played twice in the lead up to this World Cup. It was quite a long time ago, but Canada won both of those matches that they played. It was, I believe both of them were played in Canada, but Australia, it's very, very interesting because, like you mentioned, they have widely regarded as the best player in the women's game in Sam Kerr, and they also have a ton of talent that's playing in the Women's Super League and a lot of the other top leagues around the world, like Ellie Carpenter, Steph Catley plays for Arsenal. They're going to play out of a 4-4-2, and where they're at their best is they have outstanding fullbacks, the two women I just mentioned, and outstanding wide midfielders as well. So they love to just create overloads in the wide areas of the pitch to pull defenders away from Sam Kerr and just send in a bunch of crosses to her. That's how they play. It's kind of similar to how the men's Australian team played at the 2022 World Cup. And I mean, there's no doubt that Australia has a ton of talent. And like you mentioned, they have had a ton of encouraging results in the lead up to this. But Canada, I mean, they have just as much talent as Australia. And, they still have Christine Sinclair, who's 40 years old now, but is still putting up really, really good numbers for the Portland Thorns in the NWSL. And if you look around their other rosters, Julia Grosso is a fantastic midfielder for Juventus. Sam Kerr's Chelsea teammate, Jessie Fleming, had a fantastic season for them in the Women's Super League. Like, Canada has a ton of talent, and they put a big time premium on getting the highest quality chance possible. And it's proven to be successful for them. I mean, they've tested themselves. They've played one of the most difficult schedules of, in terms of friendlies of any team leading up to this World Cup. So they are battle tested. Like we already mentioned, they're the 2021 Olympic champions, so they have experience getting deep in a tournament like this. So at a price of 2-1, and when it comes down to that final group stage match, we'll see what happens. But I think that a price of 2-1 is a tad too long for a Canadian team that has just as much talent as Australia, who's getting a little bit of a bump. The other two teams in this group we probably should mention, Ireland is going to be a very, very low block centric type team, 5-4-1, essentially, rely on a lot of direct counterattacking opportunities. And Nigeria has two incredibly talented attackers. Oshaola, who plays for Barcelona, had a 1.4 XG per 90-minute scoring rate this season. So they're going to be a fun underdog team to bet to score. But again, a team like Nigeria doesn't have much talent in terms of their defense, and they've really struggled in that aspect. But will be a fun underdog team if you want to bet, maybe both teams to score on that. But that's it for Group B. Both of us in alignment again. Canada to win this group at 2-1.
Yeah,
All right,
Nigeria's really interesting because there's a lot of off the field stuff happening with this team right now, and so it becomes difficult to kind of figure out where they are. There could be a strike heading into the first match because of pay compensation issues with the Nigerian Football Federation, and they have been in the World Cup a lot in their history. They've qualified for every tournament, but they've only have 4 wins in 26 matches. You mentioned the firepower, the attacking firepower. Osasuna, third most goals in all of Europe's top 5 leagues last year. So certainly is firepower. And you'll see that with some of these lower teams that are really interesting. We're going to get to Zambia later. Like there are a few other teams, even like a China, who have a bunch of really good attackers who can really make this an interesting contest. But the overall midfield and defensive issues are going to make these teams very vulnerable once they go up against more complete teams above them in the ladder. So yeah, Ireland wouldn't shock me if Ireland finished last. You're going to see Ireland be a trendy pick as like a sneaky underdog because they have had some good form. But overall, I don't really see the overall talent level being high enough, even though they've had, like I said, a decent run of form here.
Yep, I agree. All right, let's move on to Group C. Spain, one of your tournament favorites, is sitting at -600 to win this group. Japan sitting at 4-1. Zambia 100-1, and Costa Rica is the longest shot in this group at 500-1. This is a really, really interesting group. And if you looked at this just from a straightforward lens and didn't pay attention to anything that's happening off the field, it seemed pretty straightforward that Spain would win this group in a runaway because they have probably some of the most talent of anybody in this entire World Cup field. But Anthony, there's some off the field stuff happening with Spain right now that gives me a lot of pause on whether they're not only going to win this group, but even go far in this World Cup.
I feel like somebody needs to put like dramatic music behind me as I like tell the story of Jorge Vilda and like what's happened with the Spanish national team. But basically last year, if you haven't been paying attention, last September, 15 players wrote a letter to the Spanish Soccer Federation, basically demanding that Vilda be removed. They claimed emotional abuse and that he was too hard and that he was not fair, and they wanted him out, basically. And the Spanish Soccer Federation, interestingly, did not. And we're not talking about like 15 just random squad players. There's a lot of very talented players, some of the best players on the Spanish roster. And the result of that is that they kept the manager and said, we're not going to just give in to the demands. So he's still managing the team. And there's been a kind of 3 different groups of players. Some players have said, we will not play for him. And so there's a couple players that would have been contributing squad players that are not in this team. There are some who, under the pressure, I guess, of wanting to play for their nation in the World Cup, have kind of come crawling back to Vilda and said, I still have my problems, but I want to play. I want to contribute. I want to, play for my country. They were accepted back. And then there were some players, I think, where the relationship had gotten so sour that even though they asked to come back, Vilda said no and left them off the squad. When you look at Spain's team on paper, they're as good an attack as anybody in this tournament. They have a ton of kind of creative midfielders. They play similar to the Spanish men's national team in that they want to have a ton of possession. There are major question marks about their defensive ability, especially defending without the ball because they have so much possession. And we saw that just in December in Qatar with the men's team, that when they didn't have the ball, they looked really shaky out of possession defensively. And I think you're going to see similar issues for Spain on set pieces and in those areas here. But with Alexis Putellas, who's one of the best players in the whole world, Ballon d'Or winner herself, like they have all of the attacking talent. They have Barcelona being the best women's team in the world right now. They're pulling a bunch of players from that team to play for the Spanish national team. But the question is, how do we power rate and how do we assess like how good this team is if we know that the players don't really like the manager? And we've seen this in the past, where one of the leading causes of underperformance of a very talented team at a World Cup is often because the players just don't care. They don't want to play for the manager. The manager has it out for certain players, so he leaves them out of the team. It's very hard to get a real read on this Spanish team because coming into the tournament, they were a team I was hoping to bet as an outright. And I think they've got a pretty favorable draw. Like if they win their group, like Switzerland potentially in the round of 16, then Sweden in the quarterfinal, like that's a pretty favorable draw to the semis where they would be the better team. But again, like, can we trust them? I can't. There's just too much drama going on behind the scenes with the Spanish team.
I agree. Yeah, it's tough because when I was doing my prep for this, I came into it being like, I want to bet Spain. They have so much talent, like, and they probably should be the second favorites. But everything that's happening off the field gives so much pause. And we've seen it, like you mentioned, we've seen it with international tournaments time and time again. When there's turmoil heading into a tournament, teams often don't perform very well. So that leads me in this group to bet a team like Japan to win the group. And the best price you can find out there right now is 5-1. The Japanese team doesn't have near the talent that the Spanish team does. But what they do have is a very, very versatile style of play where they can be a possession dominant team, or they can sit back and they can press you and then they can play in transition. The way they press, though, is going to set up perfectly to do essentially what the Japanese men's team did to Spain at the Men's World Cup, where they love to kind of sit back, set these pressing traps, and then just punish you on the counter. And listen, Japan and Spain have played each other in a friendly before. Spain won the match 1-0. They scored in the 8th minute, and Japan went on to create 1.6 expected goals and outshot Spain 11-6. So for a Spanish team, like you mentioned, that out of possession is not good in transition defense, playing a Japanese team that is very, very good in transition, has been battle tested, played at the She Believes Cup, has tested themselves at a lot of difficult competition throughout friendlies. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Japan comes away with this group and wins it, just like the men's team did at the World Cup. And the other two teams in this group, Zambia is going to be a fun team. The price on them to advance is a tad too low for me. I can't get on 5-1. If you give me 10-1, maybe I'll take a stab at it. They have two great strikers, Chanda and Kunda Nanji, who both play for Madrid CFF, who finished 5th in Spain this season. Kudananji bagged 25 goals and was, second in the Golden Boot race in Spain. So they're a team much like Nigeria, who's going to set up in a 4-4-2, play very, very direct, but they have a ton of pace going forward, ton of power, two great strikers, can give a lot of problems. And Zambia, leading up to this World Cup, has had some impressive results. They lost to Ireland 3-2, but won the XG battle 2.1 to 1.5. They drew Switzerland 3-3, won the XG battle there. And then they beat one of the tournament favorites, Germany, 3-2, although Germany kind of dominated them on XG. But it's very, very impressive for this Zambian team who made a deep run in the Africa Cup of Nations, making it to the semifinals to potentially get out of this group. And the other team, Costa Rica, just really doesn't have the talent to compete. 19 of their 30 players are playing domestically in Costa Rica. So, when Zambia plays Costa Rica, if we can get a decent enough price, I'll bet on them. But Zambia, much like Nigeria, is going to be a very, very fun team to bet to score against both Japan and against Spain.
Yeah, I think when you look at Zambia, so they kind of broke onto the scene at the Olympics when they had a 10-3 loss to the Dutch. So that wasn't a great opening game, but scoring 3 goals on the Dutch is nothing to be sneezed at. And then they had a comeback draw against China 4-4, and then played Brazil pretty much even. They defended deep and were dangerous in transition, lost 1-0, but they were pretty good in that. Everybody was like, okay, this Zambia team might be on the rise. Now they've tried to be more defensive, and in the AFCON they were better defensively, but again, like how good is the level of competition in AFCON? It's not nearly the level that they're going to be seeing in this tournament. They only conceded 3 total goals in that AFCON. Finished 3rd. None of the goals came from open play. Then they had a couple of friendlies with Colombia that they lost. So yeah, in a different group, I would have been really into Zambia. I just think that the Japanese floor is pretty high. Now, of course, like Spain could have like this mutiny could just be that detrimental, but even still with Spain, like there's just so much talent. They have 3 players in the top 12 in the Golden Boot odds, including Redondo from Levante, who was the leading goal scorer in Spain this year. She's awesome. Like they're going to have so much firepower, and those 3 players doesn't even mention, with Gonzalez and Hermoso and Putuelas, like they have so much talent in going forward, that I think they're going to score a lot of goals on Zambia, which is going to be a problem for them to advance. So yeah, not a good enough number on Zambia to advance, but I think the Japanese floor, even though this is not the Japan of the last decade, like that generation has definitely turned over, and this one is just not quite as talented. Japan is more in that like 10 to 15 range for me than a normal top contender.
Right. And this is also kind of a good picture on the lens of like the disparity of talent in the women's game. Spain, some of the World Cup qualifiers happened before the Euros, and then some of them happened after. They outscored their opponents 53-0 in the World Cup qualifiers, which is going to be similar to, England and all these other top teams where they just punished everybody throughout World Cup qualifying. So you can't really take into account those matches, against the Faroe Islands, Hungary, Ukraine, Scotland, some of the teams that aren't really in this World Cup. But we'll see. I mean, yeah, when we get into the individual matches, I think Zambia will be a very, very fun team to bet. All right, let's move on to Group D. One of the tournament favorites, England, is one of the biggest favorites to win a group at over minus 3,000. Denmark is 12-1 to win this group. China sitting at 40-1 to win this group, and Haiti is the longest shot at 80-1. This seems like one of the more straightforward groups, in my opinion, that I believe that England and Denmark are just going to go through. And I think that the odds are just a tad too high. First of all, on England to win this group and to advance. I mean, there's no way I'm going to, pay that drastic of a price. I mean, England is pretty straightforward, the second or third best team talent-wise in the world. And Denmark, who does have a lot of talent, I would have loved to get them in this group over China, but the odds have just kind of gotten too big on them. So I am passing on this group. Do you have any thoughts here on Group D?
Yeah, I mean, I think England is a little overvalued. I am not seeing what everybody else is, just given the injury situation. I get why England is priced where they are, and I get why they're minus 330 to win this group. I get it. They won the Euros last season, last summer. They beat Germany in the final, but they lose Leah Williamson, who's their captain and their best defender. They lose Beth Mead, who was the leading goal scorer at the Euros. They lose Fran Kirby to injury now. They have lost a ton of depth and key pieces in every part of this team. Even if Mary Earps is the best goalkeeper in the world, and that's still going to be a huge strength for them, like this is a dangerous path for the English. And I can't get to the number in terms of just speaking outrights. And we're going to do more kind of on the general picture of the whole field tomorrow on our show. But I think that the injuries here are going to be a problem when you consider that they're going to potentially have a path of Canada or Australia, then Germany, then France, and then the United States. That's like the hardest path they could face. They would have to beat the 4 other best teams in the world to win this tournament, and you're only getting like plus 430 on them to win the whole thing, plus 450. I know how good Wiegman's been since she came in, 30 wins in 31 games. It's very impressive, but you're buying the peak value on them. And if you go back to that Euro final, like I had Germany in the final, Germany didn't have Alexander Pop, who's their best player, their best striker. And Germany still had more shots, more expected goals, created more chances, like just kind of controlled the flow of the game, lost 2-1 in extra time. This England team was at home for the whole tournament and still didn't dominate the way that I thought they could have. The quarterfinal game was also very even. They had one impressive win against the Swedes. So I think that there's some holes in this English team just because of all the injuries. And I think that's going to make them a little bit vulnerable, even if they probably win this group going away. I just don't think it's going to show up in this group. When you look at Denmark, like Denmark has, it's kind of similar to the men's in the same way that they had that magical Euro run back in 2017. And then they've been trying to recreate that magic. And like we saw last year at the World Cup in the men's, they weren't able to recreate it. They do get Harder back. She was expected to potentially miss this. She's their best player in terms of scoring goals, creating chances. They just signed, she's just going to sign with Bayern. And then Sondergaard's last ride as manager. So like, can they recreate the magic with them in charge? We'll see. I think their matchup with China is going to be really interesting because there is a lot of 2 teams that want to have the ball, 2 teams that press a lot, 2 teams that have attacking talent to create chances. But I think that Denmark's much better out of possession, much better defensively. And I think that's ultimately what gets them out of this group. I thought it would be closer to a coin toss, and I would have laid Denmark. We talked about this just before the show. Like Denmark at minus 250 to advance, probably right about where it should be. Whereas if they had come in under minus 200, I would have laid it on the Danes to advance. I do think they advance, but I don't really see a ton of upside here. The winner, whoever comes in second in this group, is going to get the Aussie Canada winner. So that would be a potential underdog spot there, although they could scare those teams, and then they would get France potentially in the quarterfinal, where I think they'd run out of gas. So I don't really see a ton of upside for the Danes, but in this group, it's really England and then everybody else.
Yeah, I agree. The thing about China, it's very interesting because they are the Asian Cup champions. They beat Japan and South Korea on the way to win that. But since then, they've been really poor in the lead up to this. Like, they've got dominated by Sweden 4-0. They drew Ireland and Switzerland 0-0, and then got thrashed 3-0 by Spain just before. And then even today, they played against Colombia and drew them 2-2. So there's, like you mentioned, like, they're a 4-4-2 team that likes to do, a lot of like Japan, a lot of pressing traps, sit back kind of in a low block, but they will come out and press you, and they are successful in doing that. They're going to be a team that, basically all their players play domestically in China, which is not a horrible league in terms of talent level, but it's not up to the par of the level of some of the other top leagues around the world throughout, Europe and Australia, the United States, to mention a few. So it's very, very difficult to get behind China, given their poor results coming into this World Cup, even though they are the Asian champions. But yeah, like you mentioned, Denmark at minus 250, a team that has a lot of, a pretty decent amount of talent, with especially getting harder back. Braun plays for Lyon, one of the best French teams in the world. So very, very difficult to get behind China to advance in this group. So I think this is one of those groups where you just kind of have to pass and let it go. But yeah, the Denmark-China game will be very, very interesting and pretty much ultimately decide who is going to go through in this group.
Yeah, it's incredibly cool. I want to talk about Haiti real quick. It is very cool that they made it to this tournament. And I actually think that, like, had they been in a group with a weaker second and third team, they might have had a chance. Maybe.
Group H.
Yeah, like if they had been put in Group H or even like a Group A with New Zealand and the Swiss, like I would have been more interested in them. They have a lot of young talent. They're pulling a lot, and they've had a real plan. They've gotten a lot of their top players into the French league and kind of tried to build it from there. They look really young. They're one of the youngest teams on paper in terms of like where their squad is relative to peak age. They probably lack like top end technical quality as a result of that, but like they just had Melchi Dumernay join Lyon. She's 19. Like, I feel like this Haiti team, if they keep them together, the next cycle, this could be like a golden generation of Haiti where they could actually get out of a group, and it wouldn't shock me. But again, like, they're probably still a cycle away. They are going to be interesting. They were competitive. They had pre-tournament friendlies with Korea and Nigeria that they lost by just a single goal. In the CONCACAF women's tournament last year, they were significantly less competitive. Lost to Jamaica by 4, the United States by 3, and lost to Costa Rica in a friendly prior to that. So, like, there haven't been a ton, but you can see the signs that they're building towards something. I just think that something is probably another cycle away. I'm not really convinced that they have the experience or the current talent to get there right now.
Yeah, I agree. It is encouraging, like you said, like with a lot of their players playing over in France, does give you encouragement as opposed to some of these other long shots who a lot of their players are just playing domestically in whatever country they are. So encouraging stuff for Haiti. I believe they're 5-goal underdogs against England in the first game, which, maybe we can, talk ourselves into that one, but probably not.
Do they get a dead rubber at the end? Who do they play in the last match?
They play. I believe they are going to play they're going to play Denmark in the final one. So maybe the second match against China, depending on the odds with that one, maybe we can get a decent price on them to beat the Chinese team. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, let's move on to the group everybody's been waiting for. Group E, the United States of America, your 2-time defending World Cup champions. They're only minus 275 to win this group, and they are in a kind of difficult group with the Dutch, who are 2-1 to win this group. Portugal sitting at 50-1, and then Vietnam, one of the longest shots in the tournament, at 500-1. It's, we'll dive deeper into this when we talk Team USA on our next show tomorrow. But you kind of mentioned off the top, in terms of the women's game, the rest of the world is catching up with the United States, and it's really reflected here in the odds. And they are in a difficult group with the Dutch, who they beat in the final at the 2019 World Cup. Question is, though, Anthony, are you laying it at minus 275 with the United States to win this group, or is there another angle potentially trying to fade the Dutch to not get out of this group?
I think when we look at the outright prices, I think the market is telling you not only that the world is catching up to the United States, but the world is actually caught up to the United States. And the market thinks so, because if you look at it, yes, the United States is favored plus 250 to win the World Cup. Most shops, and that has come down a little bit, but it's roughly in that spot for the last 6 months since the bracket came out. Well, if you consider that they got pretty much the most favorable draw you could have possibly imagined, the fact that they are only this small of a favorite over the rest of the field is a sign that England, France, Germany, Spain have caught up in terms of true talent, just like raw talent on the field. And that, because those teams are going to beat each other up to get to the play of the United States, the United States is the betting favorite. I have no interest in laying the minus 275, but I'm also not really a believer in the Dutch, relatively speaking. This Dutch team without Viv Miedema is just not as imposing to me. Like, they played at the Olympics 2 years ago in summer of 21. Miedema scored twice, kind of kept the Dutch in the game. It was a very even game, but the Dutch have had a lot of performances where they've gone up in kind of weight class and played the big squads in the world and gotten a little bit embarrassed. And it goes even back to the World Cup in 2019. I know that was a very different women's national team in 2019, but that game in that final was not competitive at all. XG was 3 to 0.4 in favor of the United States. The Dutch have had some really questionable results in the interim. They lose to Germany at home, which isn't terrible on paper, but it wasn't that competitive of a match in terms of chances created. And then at the Euros last summer, it was the wipeout loss to France. Like, it was only 1-0 on the score line, but XG 4.7 to 4 or to 1 rather. And then even in their other matches, like, they were fine. They played Switzerland, even Portugal, they were slightly better. They played to a draw with Sweden. Like, this is a team that I think is teetering on like tier 1, tier 2 of the competitors. And I think they are clearly below the Frances of the world and closer to even like a Portugal or Sweden. So I think it's interesting. Portugal in this group is 8-1 to advance, and you're essentially betting them against the Dutch. And I think at 8-1, I'm going to be buying this Portuguese team. They don't have a ton of pedigree in their history, but they play a very expansive kind of like flair-based style. It's different from how the Portugal men's team has played for the last couple of cycles. But this is a team that has been competitive. They beat Norway in the Algarve Cup last year. Then they lost to them in the second match. They've had up and down results. Like I said, they pushed the Netherlands. They have not matched up well with the Swedes at all. But again, I think the Dutch are below the Swedes at this point. So on an 8-1 ticket, they're going to probably be my favorite long shot, maybe second favorite long shot. I'm going to take them to advance. I think that the kind of the group of talent they put together is good enough for me to believe, given the Dutch style and just how inconsistent they are defensively. I think you could see them leak goals in this tournament and get beat in that. And I believe that's their second match. Or that's their first match. So it's going to be decided pretty quickly here, potentially for Portugal. If Portugal can get an upset, they will be very live to advance out of this group. And like I said, 8-1 to advance. I think the United States gets the Dutch second as well, which could also factor into kind of how this plays out. Where the United States gets Portugal last. If the United States has already won the first 2 games, they could rotate, which could give Portugal a chance to steal a point. Also could keep the goal difference down, which could matter if the Dutch and the Portuguese tie in their first match, which is certainly in the cards. So I think Portugal 8-1 is my long shot here, and I'm buying into them. I don't really see Vietnam as much of a threat. They're catching 6.5 in their first game against the United States. Which is kind of, an indicator of where they are as a footballing nation right now. And, qualifying for the World Cup is a big achievement for them, but they don't really have the talent to compete with these other 3 teams. And like I said, I just don't think the gap between Portugal and the Dutch is that big. So 8-1, Portugal to advance.
Yeah, I'm actually starting to believe that and agree with you because, you mentioned it, Portugal and Netherlands were paired in a group at the Euros. I mean, Netherlands won that match 3-2. XG was just 1.8 to 1.4. And even with the Dutch holding 62% possession, box entries were about the same. So getting a price at 8-1. The Netherlands is minus 225 in their first match against Portugal. Portugal's plus 550 at Bet365. So getting them a price at 8-1, which you mentioned goal differential with a team like Vietnam in this group, where every team when they play them are going to be significantly high on the spread. That goal differential could come into play, even if, Portugal draws their first match with the Netherlands. And the Netherlands, you mentioned Madema being out is obviously massive for them. She's their best striker. And the incredibly poor result against France is just incredibly concerning to get 4.7 expected goals created on you, giving up 32 shots against one of the favorites. It doesn't give you much encouragement for this Dutch team. And they were much better under Weigman. Now they're under a different manager. The results haven't been there, and they're still getting priced like they're one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the world. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. So I agree with you that I do like Portugal to get through this. The one thing encouraging about Portugal is a lot of their players do play domestically in Portugal, but they all play essentially for Benfica or for Porto. So like they're very cohesive type group that's played together a lot, especially with their back line. I believe it is basically all Benfica teammates. So very, very encouraging stuff from Portugal, who, hasn't been I believe this is their first or second World Cup. So, they haven't been a powerful footballing nation in terms of the women's game, but they are improving in terms of their talents, and they're getting better. And this is finally their time to make a mark here at the World Cup. So I agree with you, Portugal at 8-1. And then, Vietnam, we have to mention it. I mean, they got here because they made the quarterfinals of the Asian Cup, but they were not competitive whatsoever in that. And it's very interesting, how teams are able to, qualify for this World Cup, because essentially Asia, there is no World Cup qualification like there is in Europe. Essentially what happened is Vietnam, they finished third in their group. They tied with Myanmar 2-2, but they beat them on goal differential -6 to -7. And then Iran was in a group and they had a -12 goal differential. So the third place team's getting ranked. Vietnam just barely squeaked into the quarterfinals and then just got beat pretty badly. So they didn't really do much to actually get to this World Cup. Like, okay, it's an accomplishment. They just had one draw and that was basically it. They're going to try to sit very, deep. They're a team where essentially all of their players are playing domestically in Vietnam. So you can kind of see why. The United States is laying 6.5 goals, which if you look at the last World Cup, I mean, the United States had Thailand in their group and they beat them 13-0. So we'll get to when we talk about the Team USA. But from a betting perspective, I think Vietnam is close to unbettable at this point, given the fact that they're just so bad, and I don't really want to take them, 7 goals, essentially what it's going to end up being on the spread once all the USA money comes in by the time we get to that match. So just wrapping things up here, Group E, I agree with you. Portugal at 8-1 is too high of a price given where they've improved as a footballing nation and given the problems and injuries with the Netherlands.
Market has actually moved toward Vietnam a little bit on that.
Oh,
it was 6.5, leaning toward 6.75, and it's closer to 6.25 now. So some money coming in on Vietnam in the first match.
We'll see if that.
I wish those gamblers best of luck.
I do too.
It feels like a USA picks their score kind of game. And look, I have my thoughts in the U.S. women's national team. We're going to go more in depth with them.
Yeah.
In that episode, and as we get into best bets tomorrow, because obviously the United States is going to be deep into this tournament, and we're going to be having a lot of discussions about them for the next month. But this group is interesting for sure. They're going to be tested in two of their 3 matches, at least somewhat.
Yep, I agree. All right, let's move on to Group F. France is your favorite in this group, sitting at -200. Brazil sitting at +150. Jamaica is 66-1 to win this group. And Panama, one of the longest shots in this entire tournament, is 250-1. We are in agreement, and we'll get to our best bets show in more depth. But we love this French team, and they have one of the best international managers in the entire world now at the helm after a big scandal happened with the previous managers. So hopefully things have been smoothed out, but they are, sitting a little, maybe it's a little too high, but I honestly think maybe it's a little bit too short for France to win this group on a team that I think is actually, talent-wise, one of the best teams in the world. What do you think, Anthony?
Look, we talked about Spain and kind of the mutiny that happened within their team. France had a similar situation. Corinne Diacre was the manager for France, and she had kind of fallen out of favor with a lot of the players, and they kind of went to the federation and kind of demanded that she be fired. And the French Federation listened, and they fired her, and they brought in Hervé Renard, who we talked about at length last year in our World Cup men's preview pod, because he was the manager of Saudi Arabia. Prior to that, he was the manager of the Moroccan national team, and really kind of oversaw the development that ultimately led to, the cycle that they just had. And so Renard has had a lot of success. And what I like about him is that the tactical flexibility that he showed in that tournament last year. Like, that team on paper was not very good. They were thoroughly outplayed by the Argentinians, who ended up going to win the World Cup, by the way. But in the first 45 minutes, they drew 10 offsides against the Argentinians. They went with a seemingly suicidal high line, but it paid off. And they held Argentina under 2 expected goals, and including a penalty. And they created just enough to win the match. And they pulled off one of the biggest upsets in the history of soccer, with Argentina losing as 20 to, or Saudi Arabia winning as a 20-1 underdog. And then they lost to Poland, but that match, they were the better side for large stretches of it, playing an entirely different style in that match than they did in the first one. So Renard comes in, and based on the results in their lead up here, I think it's clear that he's already gotten some buy-in, and he's brought in some key talented players that Diacre had frozen out. So, the biggest one being Eugénie Le Sommer, who at the last 2 World Cups came in as one of the best players in the world. She is now post-peak at 34, but still her off-ball movement, her ability to link the play, she's as good as anybody in this tournament as a central forward, even if she's not quite as explosive. And then you look at like the results, like a 5-2 win against Colombia. They handled Canada, and they handled Ireland. They did have a setback in Australia, a 1-0 loss in their last match, but they come into this tournament now with a chance to kind of play their way into form. And we talked about the section of death that is forming here. If England and Germany both win their group, there's a potential for an England, Canada, Germany, Brazil section of the draw, where 4 of the best 10 teams will be in the same quadrant in the knockout stage. France would actually be the benefactor of that. They would be on the top half of that section, where they would potentially play Colombia/South Korea, and then either Australia, Canada, or Denmark. So their path to the semifinal is very friendly. I'm not going to lay the -200 here. I'm instead going to play the make the semifinal price. You can find a +140 out there on them to make the semifinals. That is my favorite bet here. I'm also betting them, or excuse me, +170 to make the semifinals. And then there is a 13-1 to win the World Cup. This French team was unfortunate to go out in the last World Cup. They, played relatively even at the Euros last summer with the top teams. I mentioned their complete domination of the Dutch. We just talked about that. Like, there have been a lot of competitive matches, and this was prior to Renard even coming in, that they went toe-to-toe with Germany, who I think might be the best team in the world right now on paper. So I'm in on this French team now that they seem to be work together, more cohesive. I love the manager's tactical flexibility, his credibility, and I love the talent across the board. It's as good as any team in this tournament. So, vive la France, ramenez la coupe à la maison.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we love Hervé Renard on this show. I mean, there's a famous saying, Anthony, because he's won the Africa Cup of Nations twice, once with Zambia and once with the Ivory Coast. So the people of Africa say, do not doubt the power of the white-collared shirt, his lucky white-collared shirt. He
may only own one of the shirt. It might just be the same shirt.
I think he said that at the World Cup. Somebody asked him if he was going to change his shirt, and he was just like, "No, why would I do that? It's incredibly lucky." But yeah, no, he like you mentioned, his tactical flexibility, and with the French women's national team, like, he has so much talent to be able to utilize that tactical flexibility. I mean, if they want to play, which they have shown in the past, of this high pressing, high intensity, high line, Well, they have one of the best center backs in the world in Wendy Renard, who is not related to Hervé Renard, by the way. I had to look that up. But she is not. She's in the center back partnership with De Almeida, who those are two of the best center backs in the French league and the world, essentially. They have 3 ball progression machines in the middle of the pitch. And you mentioned Le Sommer. I mean, she was a 1.19 XG plus expected assist per 90-minute striker this season. And then she has a partnership with Diani, who plays for PSG, who won the Golden Boot in France at a 1.01 XG per minute scoring rate. So there is plenty of depth to this attack. And France, whatever Renard decides to do, they have shown previously that they are a slow progression build-up style team, but they're very, very effective at breaking down low blocks. They're not essentially, a team like, maybe a Netherlands or a Switzerland who want to build up very slowly, but then kind of struggle when they get into the final third. They've been very, very good at whether they want to attack the middle of the pitch, whether they want to attack out wide, via crosses. They're so good. I mean, they were outside of England, they were the best offensive team at the Euros. I mean, they created 17.4 expected goals in total in their 5 matches. So, you look at the other teams in this group, Brazil, who is a team with a really high floor. Like they have talent, got team, women who are playing, whether it be over in the NWSL or in Spain, and they've had some decent results coming in. They went to the She Believes Cup. They got beat by the United States and Canada, did get a 1-0 win over Japan. Then the lead up to this World Cup, they did have an impressive 2-1 win over Germany and then beat Chile for nothing. And they're a team that can also play a couple of different styles. They like to play a 4-4-2, and they like to utilize their pace, and they like to play very vertical transitional style, which could be okay against France. But given the talent disparity between these two teams, a team that Brazil with a high floor, low ceiling, I'm not so sure that, especially when they face teams that are good build-up teams, Brazil does like to come out and press. It's very evident when they played, the United States and Canada and even Germany. I mean, Germany completed over 30 passes in the final third against Brazil in that match, even though Brazil won it. So, it's kind of difficult for me to get behind Brazil, and I'm just in love with this French team. So I am laying them at -200 to win this group. If you look at the other teams, Jamaica has one of the best strikers in the Women's Super League in Kaija Shaw, who scored 20 goals for Manchester City this season. It's kind of her or nothing. Like Jamaica's going to play, very direct, very, counterattacking, but they're not very good, sitting a low block. If you look at their results coming into this World Cup, I mean, they've gotten beaten 5-0 by Italy, 4-1 by Australia, and 4-0 by the United States. They split a couple matches with South Korea and Paraguay. So not really encouraging for Jamaica to potentially get out of this. Shaw is 150 to 1 to win the Golden Boot. So I might have to throw, tenth of a unit on that just because of how good she is. I mean, for Jamaica, I mean, I get it. They've played a lot of, island nations, in CONCACAF and everything, but she's scored 56 goals in 38 appearances. Like, she's incredible. And then Panama is the longest shot in this entire World Cup. They have very little talent to speak of. And I don't see a scenario where they're even going to challenge any of these three teams and even Jamaica to get out of this group. But yes, I'm in love with France. I've already bet them at 13 to 1 to win the World Cup, and with you as well at +170 to make the semifinals, because their path to the semifinals is actually halfway decent. If they win this group, they're going to get the runner up in Group H, which we'll get to, is probably the weakest in terms of a second place team coming out of any of these groups, and then they will get the winner of Group B, which will be Australia or Canada, and the runners up to Group D, which will be Denmark, which, Canada and Australia, talent wise, I believe are maybe even like a little notch below France, and France will be favored in that one. So it'll be a good opportunity if you want to hedge. So I'm with you. I love this French team. They're one of my favorite picks to win the World Cup. I'm laying them at -200 to win this group because I think their talent level is vastly superior to that of Brazil, who is a good pressing team, but when they face good build-up teams like a team like France, they really tend to struggle and leave a lot of space in behind. So I trust Hervé Renard. He's one of the best international managers on the men's or women's side in the history of the last 10 years or so, with his pedigree throughout Africa. So France to win this group at -200 is my favorite bet.
Yeah, I think we have to talk about Marta. We have to just mention her.
Yeah.
37 years old, the most decorated women's international soccer player ever. Still going to be playing for Brazil here. She's kind of the end of the last generation, and they have kind of pushed some of the older last gens out, and they're trying to usher in this new generation. Brazil is kind of caught between, though, and I think that kind of limits their ceiling. Marta may not start. She will probably, I mean, she will play, but how much will she play is a question. I think Jamaica going to be uber defensive and just kind of hope Shaw magics a goal or two. Could pull an upset, but I really don't see it. And the problem with Brazil in terms of like upside is that second place team is just going to get Germany in the round of 16. If they win that, they're going to get England in the quarters. So it's just like not really feasible to go on a run like that. So the path is not friendly for the Brazilians or whoever comes in second. Hopefully it doesn't end up being France or we're both screwed. So yeah, moving on though.
Yep. All right, let's move on to Group G. Sweden is your favorites in this group, sitting at -600. Italy is +550 to win this group. Argentina sitting at 16-1, and South Africa is the longest shot at 66-1. This group seems pretty straightforward to me. I believe, Sweden is, they're ranked third in the FIFA rankings. They're an incredibly talented squad that I know we both love to make a deep run in this entire tournament. Italy is also a very interesting team, but their results have been a little bit questionable in terms of the Euros and leading up to this World Cup, but I don't believe Argentina has the talent to really challenge them. So it seems pretty straightforward. It's going to be Sweden and Italy getting out of this group. But Sweden, Anthony, is a very, very interesting team, like I already mentioned, to make a deep run in this tournament.
Yeah, Frida Rolfo is one of the more exciting kind of forward wingy players in this entire field. She's going to be a major player for them. She was excellent because they had really struggled at the Euros last year, and they had really not played up to their standards. I mean, when you think of Sweden, you can remember if you're a fan of soccer who's only women's soccer, who's only really watched U.S. women's national team, Sweden because they always play the United States and they generally play them tough. And they beat them at the Olympics a couple years ago. But this has been kind of a weird period for the Swedes where they have been down. And Rolfo is kind of the player that needs to step up for them as their wide creator. And she plays for Barcelona. She's been excellent for them and dominated as Barcelona has completely dominated Europe in the women's field. And her ability to get forward is a major key, but they have defensive holes here. So I think that there are vulnerabilities for Sweden, but the problem is like who's going to expose them. And I don't think that they got a very tough group. I would have looked to potentially play against Sweden in a different group here. But this, for me, like A is clearly the weakest just because Norway, I think, is below Sweden. I think Norway, like the other teams in their group, are a little weaker. But this is clearly the second weakest group. When you look at it, like A and G immediately jump off the page. There's no dynamite second team, and even the third and fourth are pretty weak. Argentina, they just don't have the same pedigree on the women's side they do on the men's. Don't have that same high end talent. Brazil has completely dominated CONMEBOL for pretty much the entire existence of the Confederation. So the depth in that Argentina team is not all that exciting. And Italy, similar in that way, in that they just don't have the same pedigree, and their results at the Euros weren't very impressive. So when you look at Sweden, it really comes down to, can they defend enough? Because their draw is looking tricky, but not impossible in the sense that their most likely second opponent could be the Dutch, although I think Portugal is going to have a potential something to say about that. And then a potential Spain, Japan, Switzerland, a round of quarterfinals. So I am going to take some Sweden to make the semis. When I filled out my bracket, I had Sweden there in that semifinal against the United States again. But I do think that the Swedes got a very favorable draw from the bracket gods, and that will help kind of massage over any real flaws in this team overall.
I agree. Sweden also has Blackstenius, who, plays for Arsenal, scored 13 goals between, the Women's Super League and the Champions League, along with Rolfo. So they have a ton of talent. And, Sweden, I agree. I've bet them at 20-1 to win the World Cup. I bet them with you at +250 to make the semis, just because their draw sets up perfectly. They've had some interesting results, like in the lead up to this World Cup. They drew Spain 1-1. They got beat by France 3-0, and then lost to Australia 4-0. And they also, and then if you even go back to the spring, they lost 1-0 to Denmark and then drew Norway 3-3. So it's kind of a little bit concerning in the lead up to this, but the talent level between them and Italy and Argentina and South Africa in this group, I think, is far drastic. And this is kind of one of my plays here is going to be a parlay between the United States, Sweden, and Norway to all win their groups, which I think pays out a pretty decent price. So that's going to be my one of my main bets I'm making. But the other teams in this group, and I mean, the thing with Italy, and it's kind of concerning to me, is that when you look through their results, they're a team that needs to have possession to be successful. And they adopt the same principles as, the men's team, where they like to play through the middle of the pitch, a lot of short combination passes, put the ball on the floor and just, try to beat presses. Well, if you go back to the Euros last summer, they played France and they got absolutely dismantled. They lost that match 5-1 and conceded 3.9 expected goals. Then they control the majority of the possession, against Belgium and Iceland, and they win the XG battles in both of those. It wasn't good enough to get out of the group stage because they did lose 1-0 to Belgium. But they're very conservative in their build-up play. They're very slow. They're very pragmatic. They like to do a 4-2 build-up style and even drop even one more player in to help them in that build-up. So they are using those short combination passes. But defensively, when they're out of possession, they've been bad. Over the last calendar year, they've conceded close to 2 expected goals per 90 minutes, but only conceded about 1.2 actual goals per 90 minutes. So they're a defense that is overdue to concede. The question is in this group, is there a team that can overtake them? Like you mentioned with Argentina, that most of their players are playing domestically, whether it be in Argentina or somewhere around South America. And you look at them as well, they're a team that also needs to have possession to be successful, and they haven't been good throughout CONMEBOL as well. So I don't see them. South Africa, we should also mention, is the AFCON champions in 2022. They beat Nigeria, Zambia, and Morocco on their path to championship. Although they are the champions of Africa, the problem with them is if you look at the talent level for them comparatively, I mean, most of their players are playing domestically in South Africa. So right away, that gives me a little bit of pause when I go through, in terms of talent level, for them to overtake a team like Italy. And they are playing Sweden in their first match, and I think they're 2.5 goal underdogs in that one. They do play a 4-4-2. They're very comfortable not having the ball, so that is a positive when they're going to play a team like a Sweden or a team like Italy. So if you're looking for a long shot, South Africa is 12-1 to qualify at Bet365 to get out of this group. They're a team that, like I already mentioned, they don't have a lot of talent, but they do have a lot of international pedigree. Going through the Africa Cup of Nations, beating teams like Nigeria, Zambia, and Morocco is impressive in and of itself. Their offensive output isn't that great. The lead up to this World Cup hasn't been great. They got dismantled by Brazil. They played 2 matches against them, lost a combined 9-0. They played Zambia again, lost 1-0 to them, and lost 4-1 to Australia. So confidence isn't really that high coming into this group. They are in a difficult group, but if you're looking for that long shot, because we haven't really given out very many long shots in this other than Portugal to advance at 8-1. South Africa does have the international pedigree in terms of a tournament to get through this type of group. And with the defensive question marks of Italy, a team that's bad in transition defense, and Argentina that talent-wise is closer to a South Africa than they are to an Italy, I'll make a case for South Africa at 12-1 to get through this group. But I believe it is going to be very straightforward that Sweden's going to win this group and run away and get a very favorable draw, playing potentially Spain in the quarterfinals.
You mentioned, but you also mentioned Japan too. So we have had a few.
Yeah,
Japan,
yeah, 5-1. Yeah. So some,
and then you're riding here. South Africa, and I've got one left in my holster that I've been waiting on.
Yep. So let's get to it. Group H, which is the most top-heavy group of any of them in the World Cup. Germany, one of the tournament favorites, is -2,000 to win this group. Colombia is 12-1 to win the group. South Korea 20-1, and Morocco, the longest shot, at 150-1 to win this tournament. But you believe that Morocco potentially has a chance to get out of this group and to qualify at a pretty high number.
Yeah, 22-1 to qualify. I'm going to be firing on that. And no, it has nothing to do with what the men's team did last year. One of our more famous calls, but it really has to do with this Morocco team and kind of the building blocks of what I think is a decent team. They bring in Pedros from Lyon, like we mentioned before, one of the biggest teams in women's soccer and consistently in the Champions League. He won the league multiple times, the Champions League multiple times. So he goes to Morocco, which is weird. And they pulled in a ton of dual nationals from other countries, the people with the opportunity to play for Spain and Morocco or France and Morocco. And he pulled in a lot of talent. And they've now put together a well-organized defense that has had some okay enough results for me to buy in. Like they drew away to Italy, they drew away to Switzerland, they lost 1-0 at Jamaica, and they have only scored 5 goals in their 9 games, their last 9. But if you look at the on paper, the talent to score goals pretty much comes down to Rosella Ayani, who plays for Tottenham. Like the scoring goals is going to be a challenge for them, but in this group where everybody's going to lose to Germany, and then it's kind of like a mucky battle for the next spot. Like Colombia plays this haywire style that I don't know will translate all that well to a tournament. To the point where like they're going to probably score and Myra's awesome, but they don't defend at all. So can a more disciplined, maybe less talented, but more disciplined team sneak a goal and defend? And that's kind of the path here for me to get interested in 22-1. South Korea, we talked about China beating Japan and Korea. I'm kind of not that interested in any of the East Asian teams because I think they're all relatively down. Like this Korean side, I think they're better than Colombia, but I don't think that the gap between those two and the Moroccans is that big. So at 22-1 to advance, when I think everybody's going to take a loss to start the tournament with the Germans, like I just have to fire on that. So give me the Moroccans, trusting the defense, trusting Pedros, trusting kind of this system that could bear some fruit for them as a footballing nation.
Yeah, we'll talk about Germany more when we get to the our best bets show tomorrow, because they're a lot more interesting in terms of what happens in the knockout stage. Because it's very, like you said, it's very straightforward. They're going to win 3 matches and they're going to get through this group fairly easily. You mentioned Morocco, and I was doing my prep on them, and throughout AFCON they did control a lot of possession. They, with the new manager, he adopted a 4-2-3-1, and it's not like a lot of these women's national teams that are very 4-4-2 direct counterattacking style play. Like they did control a lot of possession. They were the runners up at AFCON to South Africa, but even though they did control a lot of possession, they actually play a style that I think can be successful, even if they're not going to be the ones controlling a ton of that possession. Like Ayani is clearly their best player and their best attacking player. They like to just send a lot of long balls up to her and just kind of hope for the best, which is obviously going to be very, very good against a team like especially Colombia, who you mentioned their haywire style. I mean, it is balls to the wall, like all out press, and really not much cohesion in that press, or really not much of a plan. It's just kind of like, we're just going to try to win the ball back. We're just going to try to play in transition as quick as possible. And it's gotten them here. Like they got, they finished runners up to Brazil at the Copa America, but they are way too aggressive of a team, especially in this group against a team like Morocco, who can play that style. Morocco is also a very, very efficient set piece team, which is very, very good. If you're not going to be able to control a lot of possession, you need to be able to take advantage of your set piece opportunities. So I agree with you at 22-1 is a little bit too high of a price on a team that has shown a lot of promise. Not scoring is a problem coming into this, but again, it's 22-1, right? Like we're not sitting here giving you out a 5-1 price on a team that can't score. They're 22-1 to advance. So I agree with you. I like that. If you want to play another team, I also do like South Korea to advance at even money. So essentially, maybe you could, if you want to play both, you at least get your money back on one of the two, because I don't believe that Colombia is going to get through this group, given their haywire style. South Korea did go all the way, losing the final to China at that Asian Women's Cup. And, they're a team much like Jamaica that, they play a very intense pressing style. It's a lot of pressing traffic. It's not a lot of high pressing. And they have a lot of fluidity in their attack. Like they're what I love about them, and why I think they're going to set up perfectly when they play against a team like Colombia, who's going to play very haywire, or even maybe a team like Germany, much like the men's national team, is incredibly aggressive with their pressing and their high line. So playing a team like South Korea that is very versatile in their attack, that can play in transition, that can play a lot of possession, and with their 3 attackers, they're all very versatile, where they can all play different positions. So you'll see at many times where they'll just kind of rotate, around the pitch. They have, very, very, they have a lot of talent. They have Lee Min, who's who played for Brighton this season, who didn't really have great expected goal or expected assist numbers, but was in the 99th percentile for progressive passes per 90. So, rotating her along with a lot of other different players, gives them a lot of fluidity in their attack. So a very fascinating team when they play Germany to potentially, bet to score or to see what they are on the spread, potentially to bet them as an underdog. They're interesting, and you can get them at a price of even money if you don't like Morocco at 22-1. Any way to bet against Colombia to get out of this group, who I do not agree with. It should be Colombia is essentially the team that's favored over these other two teams to get out of this group. I do not agree with that at all. They're way too aggressive and are going to be so open defensively, especially against teams that are good in transition like South Korea and Morocco. It's very troublesome. So Morocco 22-1 to get out of this group. South Korea at even money is going to be my pick for this one. And it's pretty straightforward here with Germany. And we'll see what happens in this group, but we'll talk more about Germany and their prospects when we get to our best bets show tomorrow. All right. Thank you all for listening. That'll do it for this edition of Wondergoal Live. Again, we will be back tomorrow with a show entirely devoted to Team USA and their prospects of potentially winning the third straight World Cup, along with our best bets, giving out, like some of we already mentioned, teams to win the World Cup, to make the semis, quarters, and some of our favorite Golden Boot picks. So thank you again to all for listening. Thank you to our sponsors at Bet365, and we'll see you tomorrow on Wondergoal Live.